Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The customary 3 minutes after 7 o'clock start, just to allow one or two people in the door. Tonight, I have great pleasure in introducing you to Cathy Mackay, the Treasurer of the Historical Society, and Willie Fulshire, the Secretary. And the reason why we're here tonight is as part of ongoing research into the Lewes Castle project. An aspect of it was looking into the family trees of the Matheson family, and tonight we're going to see the Perceval family. Of course, the Perceval name is well known to Stornowayians through Perceval Road and Perceval Square. So you're going to find out tonight that there's quite an aristocracy behind it. Or I am going to try and explain it, but I'm going to hand you over to Cathy and Willie, who will give you an explanation as to what they're going to do and take you through it. There's quite a few visual images to appear which might surprise you, considering the majority of it is set in the 1850s, 1860s. So hang on to your seats. I'll hand you over.
Oh, it's quite a build-up there. I hope this is going to be worth it. I think Willie and I have doing this because we made the mistake of talking too much at a committee meeting, and we were press-ganged into sharing the research that we've done with you. We're not natural speakers, either of us, so we're a wee bit nervy just now, but we'll settle down in a minute once we get going. I haven't done much research into Lady Matheson, apart from a little bit I did years ago when I was doing the history of Stornoway Pier and Harbour Commission. And to be honest, at that time I was only seeing letters that she was writing to the commissioners, which were probably showing a particularly difficult side of her character. And we don't know very much about her as a person. We don't have letters from her family life or much about her other than that. So I started off with the idea that she was something like a mixture of Mrs. Thatcher and Queen Victoria rolled into one. She seemed quite strict and quite forbidding. And that's the normal picture we have of her. This one of her as probably, in her 40s, 50s maybe. At some point. I think that's one of Tony Morrison's photographs. Thanks for that, Tony. We're going to start, Willie and I, with what we're sure that we know about her, and then we're going to move on to things we think we've found out about her, bits that we've been researching. I know that we might not have covered everything, and probably there are some of you who know as much, if not more, than we do, and will be quite happy for any information that we get from anyone who's got any stories or any information about her that we haven't been able to come up with. We know that she had 9 brothers or sisters. We've got a selection of miniatures here that were sold at Bonham's, the auctioneers, over a couple of auctions, I think, maybe two auctions. Mm-hmm. Willie knows more about the Percevals than I do. In fact, I want to enrol him for Mastermind, and I want him to talk about the intermarriages of the Perceval family in the 19th century, because he has a good knowledge of all of them. Mary Jane herself is on the right-hand side in the middle. That's Mary Jane, a younger version than we know of her. And the others are, Willie, do you want to take from
Yes,
here?
Well, they're not cast in order of appearance, but on the top left you have George Ramsay Perceval, who was born about 1821. Like most of the boys in the family of Lady Matheson's brothers and sisters, he was in the army. He died quite young. He died in 1850 in Demerara. He appears to be wearing a uniform of a Highland regiment, but I'm not sure which one. He was named after Lord Dalhousie, who was the Governor-General of British North America. Their father, Lady Matheson's father, was the Collector of Customs in Quebec. So that ties in. Next to him is and Caroline Percival, who was actually the second child, born 1813, and she married Colonel Alexander Houston of Clerkington, which is just outside Haddington. He was an army officer born in India. His father was Sir Robert Houston, who was a general in the East India Company, and they were married in 1835. To the right is Colonel Charles George Percival, born 1818, also an army officer. The uniform he's wearing appears to be foreign, Austro-Hungarian apparently, but he did serve in the Coldstream Guards latterly. He was the longest lived of the family. He died in 1904. Apparently married his maid. She was 18 and he was 51. The middle left, this is Isabella, who was actually baptized as Clara Isabella, but she married a French baron, Charles de Cadier. They were married in 1841. And she died relatively young too. She died at the age of 50 in 1864. In the middle, the centre middle, is the eldest child. This is Catherine Eliza Percival, born in 1811. She married Sir George Dennis of Draycott Hall in Yorkshire. They were also married in 1835. They had 5 children, 2 of whom died relatively young.
Excuse me, Willie, could you go closer to the microphone? Some people are really struggling.
Yeah, you're talking to the screen.
Okay, I'll try. Sir George.
Roll the mic towards you.
Okay. Right, Catherine Dennis, yes. To the right, of course, is Mary Jane herself, born in 1820. We have a copy of her baptism register too, which we'll look at in a minute. Wearing a tartan dress, which is the dress she was supposed to be wearing when she met Sir James. Bottom left is young Michael Henry Perceval, born in 1819. He was a naval officer. He was married but had no children. And in the middle, bottom middle, we have Geraldine Percival. She was born in 1822 and died young in 1849 at the age of 26. And on the bottom right, we have Spencer Percival. This is the eldest son. He was a major general, ended up as a major general. He was in the Coldstream Guards. He served in the Crimean War. He was at the siege of Sevastopol. He was a bachelor, never married. So that's a brief summary of the children.
There's one missing. Christina.
Oh, Christina, yes. Christina was the youngest. She was born in 1827, and she was married to a clergyman, Reverend Edward Ashford Sanford of Somerset. She died in 1900, yeah.
So these are the ones which showed off of the immediate family, her brothers and sisters, big family. All brought up in Quebec.
Yes, they were all born in Quebec.
All
yes.
born in Quebec, all brought up in Quebec, where the family lived up until 1829. Mary Jane herself, as a younger woman, that's the famous picture of her with her tartan dress. This is a baptism record. Now, it's quite hard to read, so are you able to read?
I have it on screen here
Okay.
too, yeah. It reads in the writing of the time, of course, it's quite flowery. Mary Jane, daughter of the Honourable Michael Henry Percival of Spencerwood in the parish of Quebec, collector of His Majesty's customs, and of Anne Mary, his wife, was born, and it's actually faded at this point, but it seems to say June the 6th, baptized July the 23rd in the year of our Lord 1820. So she was born in 1820. At the bottom of the page, there's the name of the godparents. The parents are present. Now, the 2 main godparents were actually absent, so the proxies stood in for them. So one of the godparents was a Philip Joshua Percival, said here to be a captain in the 1st Foot of Guards. Now, that's the Grenadier Guards. The second was Mrs. Mary Jane Flower. She was actually Lady Matheson's aunt by marriage, married to Mrs. Percival's brother, Sir James Flower, and likely after whom she was named. And at the bottom is an Eliza Mountain, who was, I think, the wife of the daughter of the clergyman who baptised her. So that's the baptism.
It's a baptism record. So we know for sure she was born in Quebec, 1820. We know her mother, Anne Mary Flower, Mrs. Percival. And again, you're the expert on this, Willie, about Anne Mary Percival. We know she was the daughter of Sir Charles Flower, the Lord Mayor of London.
Mm-hmm.
And she stood in as Lady Mayoress, is that right?
Yes, her mother died in 1803. So her father was a government contractor and made an enormous fortune, chiefly through bribes. He became an immensely wealthy man. That's the way you made money in these days. He was born in London, as was Mrs. Percival. She was born in 1790. She was the eldest child of the family. She married Michael Henry Percival in 1810, and they were married at her father's estate at Woodford in Essex. But immediately after their honeymoon, they went to Quebec, where he was given an appointment as the Collector of Customs. Now, Mrs. Percival was a very interesting lady. She had a keen interest in botany and horticulture. Although she was an amateur, she gained fame through the collection of a number of species which she sent to Sir William Jackson Hooker, who was a professor of botany at Glasgow University. And he published the very first account of flora and fauna in America in 1840, known as the Flora Boreali Americana. And 150 of the species in that book were collected by Mrs. Percival. And she's listed in a number of dictionaries and encyclopedias. In fact, the entry I was just reading comes from a biographical dictionary of women in science. And it's believed that she may have had some role in advising on the layout of the gardens and plantations at the castle. She was only 6 years older than Sir James, and they got on very, very well. She actually died at the castle in 1876.
There's some talk about how she brought the girls up in the Spencer Wood.
Yes.
Well,
there's a little article that appeared in a book called Reminiscences of Quebec. I'll try and read a little bit of it. Let's see. The Honourable Michael H. Percival was closely connected with the Earls of Egmont family, who were Percivals. The Spencer was born from the Earl's eldest son, Spencer, which is actually not true, as well as their eldest son, Colonel, now Major General Spencer Percival, who was here in garrison in 1840 in the Coldstream Guards, as well as his uncle, Colonel Perceval, also serving in the Guards. When, as a girl in my teens, many happy days did I spend in the Perceval family, who were as passionately fond of music as I then was. They had at-homes every Monday, 1 week for dancing, the next for music. They also had grand dinners, etc., etc. Mr. Percival was a member of the Legislative Council as well as Collector of Customs, an imperial appointment which yielded him £8,000 in fees per annum. English and French society were equally welcome under his hospitable roof. His beautiful and accomplished wife was the eldest daughter of Sir Charles Flower, Lord Mayor of London. Having filled the position of Lady Mayoress when 18 years of age, her father being a widower. She brought her husband £40,000 and subsequently inherited £100,000, which is a lot of money in these days. She was eminently fitted to grace Spencer Wood, which is the house they bought in Quebec. Her beauty, her refined and cordial manners made her receptions eminently attractive. Her education was perfect. She was a mistress of 4 languages, English, French, Italian, and Latin, which studies she took great trouble in keeping up, and which she herself taught to her children, 10 number, besides teaching them the piano, the harp, and drawing. Now, we do know that the eldest daughter, Catherine, did botanical drawings, because there's an album at Harvard University of her drawings that she was done when she was 14, which she drew in Philadelphia. And that was donated by, I think, her son, Sir Francis Dennis, many years later. And someone contacted me about this a few months ago. It was quite interesting. Instead of fancy work, the young ladies were taught to repair their clothes and do plain sewing, and this did not prevent them from making brilliant matches. The family left Spencerwood in 1828 to spend a year in Italy at Florence, intending to return. But the Honourable M.H. Perceval died at sea on the 12th of October 1829, and the family never returned. And it mentions the various marriages that they made, which I've already referred to.
Yeah. So we know quite a lot about Anne Mary Flower and all the accomplishments and what she passed on to her daughters. We know a lot about her background, where she was born, who her parents were, and so on. There's her father, Sir Charles, in all his regalia as the Lord Mayor of London. Now, this is the wedding, the marriage announcement in the Belfast Commercial Chronicle, and as it was in all the other newspapers of the time. And it's quite simple. It says, on Monday last at Woodford Church, Michael Henry Percival, Esquire, to Miss Flower, eldest daughter of Sir Charles Flower, Baronet. After the ceremony, they set off for Devonshire and will afterwards proceed to Falmouth to embark for Quebec. Now, there's nothing in that statement to say who Michael Henry Percival's father, mother, birthplace, antecedents, or anything. There's nothing to say who he was. And we have never found, as far as I know, a birth certificate for him, or a death certificate even, from Newfoundland. We should maybe have tried, did we?
Well, he died at sea, and where he's buried, I don't know. It refers to him setting sail from Quebec. The family had a villa in Florence, and in fact, they'd gone to do a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and they were returning to Florence when he died. Whether he's buried in Italy, I don't know. I've not found any record. He's certainly not buried in the same cemetery as his daughter, Geraldine, who's buried in Florence.
So, we don't know for sure, but at the time that the miniatures went for sale in Bonham's auctions, one of the little catalogue entries stated that Michael Henry Percival, the family tradition was that he was an illegitimate son of Spencer Percival, the British Prime Minister, who was the only Prime Minister to be assassinated. If that's the case, we have a theory that it might not be Spencer Percival's illegitimate son, because...
Well, Spencer Percival, he was born in 1762. Now, he was the son of the second Earl of Egmont by his second marriage, but throughout his upbringing, he went to Harrow Trinity College, Cambridge. He trained for the law. He was a barrister. He entered Parliament in 1795, was in William the Pitt's government as Attorney General. But everything about his personality says that he was a very pious Christian man from a very early age, from his teenage years. And if Michael Henry Percival was born in 1779, we believe, he would only have been 17. But unlike some other members of his family, he wasn't a bit of a black sheep, that's for sure. He married the daughter of General Thomas Spencer. Was it Thomas Spencer Wilson?
Wilson,
yeah, General Wilson.
But they did elope, though.
Oh, they eloped, yes, because he was a poor barrister, and his elder brother married the sister, but he was richer, and he was the heir. He became Prime Minister in 1809, almost by default. He didn't really want the job. Although he opposed the slavery, and he also opposed Catholic emancipation, he was not a popular Prime Minister. He was seen as a reactionary. He had trouble keeping... he wasn't really interested in the job, I think. That's the impression I get about him. His assassination is slightly bizarre. He was... This disgruntled merchant by the name of John Bellingham had been imprisoned in Russia, and he was trying to seek compensation from the government without much success. So Perceval was going from the chamber to another meeting when he was stabbed in the chest by this man, and he died. Now, Perceval had a large family. And he had no money. He only had £100 when he died. So Parliament voted him £60,000 to his family, an enormous amount of money, to keep them going. Now, in accounts about Michael Henry Perceval, he's always described as a close relative, or in some cases he is described as a nephew, which I think is probably
It's
likely.
probably true. Well, the reason we think that he might be a nephew of Spencer Percival is because we came across correspondence online in the Carnarvonshire Record Office. There's a fantastic website for the Carnarvon Record Office which has a lot of collections of papers and correspondence of different families in Wales, in that part of Wales. And we came across letters from a Philip Joshua Perceval,
Who we saw in the baptism register. His name
who we
is on
just
it.
saw in Lady Matheson's baptism. Now, he's been writing to Lord Newborough, who's one of the landowners in Wales, in North Wales, and he talks specifically about his niece and the marriage of his niece to Sir James Matheson. So we know for sure that she's had an uncle, Philip Joshua Percival. We know her mother is a Miss Flower, so we know that this must be Michael Henry's brother or stepbrother. We know that he's definitely a Percival. We have a theory, because Spencer Percival had a half-brother, was it?
Yes, well, a son of the first marriage.
A son
yeah.
of the first marriage. You wouldn't believe the Percivals. You just wouldn't believe them. They marry each other, they marry cousins, they marry 3 times, then the children marry the children, and it's...
Well, it's not quite as bad. No,
Well-
I don't think it's as bad as that.
No, you
it's-
understand it, will you?
Yeah.
But anyway, Philip Tufton Percival was captain in the Navy. He seems to have been a bit of a black sheep because there's very little written about him. And even when his death comes up in 1795, it just records his death. It doesn't say, and no obituary about him, nothing to say, just to say he was the second son or the youngest son of the first marriage of Lord Egmont. It doesn't specify anything about him. No flowery obituary that you can find. We always thought that he hadn't married, but a side issue came up on that, in that we found some references in the 1930s to a court case, because eventually the Newborough title died, the Egmont title died out slowly. And I think at that point in the 30s it did end up with a rancher from Canada.
Yes, well, he was a great grandson of one of. No, he was a great grandson of one of Spencer Percival's younger sons.
So out of the blue, there was a court case from an optician in Yorkshire who said that his grandmother or great-grandmother had been a daughter of Philip Tufton Percival, who had married an actress in 1790 in London, and that they'd had a daughter. And after Philip died in 1795, this child had been taken up to Liverpool, I think, with her mother, and that the sisters of Spencer Percival, the Prime Minister, had come and called on them one time and asked to take the child with them, to live with them, and that the mother refused and said, no, you can't have this child, you didn't want her when we got married, and so you're not having her now. So Willie found the actual marriage for Philip Tufton Percival and Catherine Hennessy in what church was it in London?
St Paul's in Covent Garden, which is still there. It's known as the Actors' Church.
Which she was, Catherine Hennessy.
She was apparently an actress.
Apparently
yes.
an actress. So Philip, I gather, was a bit of a black sheep. So it is quite possible that Michael Henry and or Philip Joshua were children of Philip Joshua Percival. Certainly we have Philip Joshua's death certificate and his marriage certificate, and they both state his father was Philip Percival. So if his brother was Michael Henry, it all points to the fact that possibly Michael Henry Percival was indeed a nephew of the British Prime Minister. Maybe that's why he was packed off in 1810 to Quebec. I don't know. The letters that we found in the Carnarvon Record Office are mostly written to they are written to Spencer Berkeley Wynne, who's the third Lord Newborough now. Lord Newborough is quite. His story is.
There was, of course, a Perceval connection as well.
There was a personal connection with Lord Newborough. His father was the first Lord Newborough, who was married to Spencer Percival's half-sister, and she died in 1782.
Yeah.
And then he went off to Italy, and there he married Maria Stella Chiappini, who at that point was about 13.
She was 13, yeah.
Allegedly 13.
Yeah.
And he was...
he would have been 50.
50 odd. So he was there for about 9 years, and then he came back to Wales. In the he had already had a son from the first marriage who died in 1800. And in 1802 he had Thomas John, who died when he was in his 30s, and this man, Spencer Berkeley Wynne, who became the third Lord Newborough. Now, we don't know the connection, how it came that Philip Joshua Perceval wrote so many letters to Spencer Berkeley Wynne, but there's obviously some connection that we haven't homed in on yet. But the letters are fantastic. I mean, I had written myself some notes which I've lost, so I'm just going to have to waffle. Their father died in 1807 when they were both 5 and 4, so these two little boys were left. Their mother, Maria Stella Petronilla Chiappini, the Dowager Lady Newborough, she was a very colourful character. She claimed that she was actually a changeling, that when she was born, she was exchanged. She was from she reckoned she was from a aristocratic family in Italy, and that she had been swapped for a boy child of the Chiappinis. She particularly thought that she was descended from the Duke of Orleans, Louis Philippe, who became the last king of France. And she wrote her memoirs claiming that, and she also went through a long court case trying to prove that she was. You can find her memoirs online, and you can find other books debunking this theory or backing up her theory, The Mystery of Maria Stella. But she was quite a character. But her husband's will removed the children from her control, the two boys. And I think they had a fairly rackety upbringing. They went from tutors and from guardians. And in fact, Spencer Percival, the Prime Minister, was one of the guardians of the trustees of the trust that was set up to look after these lads as they were growing up. They, when the oldest boy inherited, he inherited 23,000 odd acres of Wales, and that included 2 slate quarries. And this is the family home, which is Plas Glynlifon. I don't know if there's any Welsh speakers here, I'm probably not doing it justice. But it is a huge pile. And Spencer Berkeley Wynne and his wife, Frances Maria, who was his first cousin as well, by the way, lived here with their children. And at one point, I think I counted 27 servants in the census in 1851. The letters that Philip Joshua writes, Philip Joshua's an army officer.
He's an army officer, yes. He was in the Grenadier Guards. He joined in 1811, although there's an entry for him as an officer in the Royal Marines, but he would have been 12 years old at that time, but it's the same name, so I don't know. He serves in the Napoleonic War and in the Peninsula Campaign, and he's actually wounded at the Battle of Bayonne in 1814, which I think was the last action of that war. We don't know what the injuries were. It may have been to the jaw or to the face. There's some indications in letters that he was wounded in the face. He later serves in Canada during the French nationalist rebellions of the late 1830s, and his young nephew Spencer, Lady Matheson's brother, is also serving with him at that time. He returns home and he's assigned to the garrison at the Tower of London, and he's promoted to colonel in 1837. He marries late in life. He marries, in fact, just the year before he died, he marries Catherine Parker. He was from an Anglo-Irish family. Her father, John Robert Parker, is a landowner in County Cork, and I think in Cheshire as well. They marry in London in 1846, and we know that James Matheson was there because he's one of the witnesses to the wedding. And the following year, 1847, he dies in Brighton at the age of 55, according to the death certificate. So, yeah.
We don't know what he looked like. I wish we did. But some of the letters we actually sent away for a number of the letters in the Carnarvon Record Office that came from Philip Joshua and from Lady Matheson's brother Spencer Percival to the Newborough family, particularly to help us to see if we could find out anything about the gardens and about the castle and about the building of Lewis Castle at the time, thinking there might be some things to help us there. And there's a lot more letters than we've actually copied, that we've got copies of, and I'd love to see more of them because he's a really interesting correspondent. I mean, he's quite funny at times, quite dry. And also, I mean, he talks about the politics of the time. He talks about Sir Robert Peel. I think in one of them, although I don't have it, I can see that he's mentioned that the Houses of Parliament are being built. He's talking about the corn laws, the sugar duties. He's talking about going to Drury Lane to plays. He's talking about... He does a lot to help the Newboroughs as well, because he looks for furniture for them. And on the continent, he looks for vases and makes sure they're all packed up to go home to Wales. He interviews staff for them, housekeepers, governesses, because it's not good for the children to be too much with the servants, he says. So he takes a real interest, and he's quite entertaining sometimes when he writes. I'm going to read some of the extracts from some of the letters that we got, just to show you what we've discovered through his time. And the first one we had was on the 10th of October 1843, and he's writing from Charlotte Square in Edinburgh, and he's saying, "My dear Newborough," and he is addressing Newborough quite familiarly. Other people are Lord Newborough, my dear Lord Newborough. He says, "My dear Newborough," so he's obviously well familiar with him. "I find myself this far on my way south, having been driven in by stress of weather and without accomplishing the little tour I had projected. All I did was to go through the Caledonian Canal from Inverness to Glasgow, which, however, was not very agreeable from the number of changes of boats between the two places. And then, while at Oban, I got alarmed at the state of the weather and gave up the plan of cutting across the country to Dunkeld, because I had seen so much mountain scenery in the course of my time on both sides of the Atlantic that I didn't feel very ardent about the Highlands while it was deluging with rain. So I determined to take up my quarters here for a time." And then he talks about how he was staying at Strathbeffer, and he says, "My sister-in-law," that's Mrs. Percival, "was at the same time staying in a small cottage in the village for the convenience of drinking the waters for rheumatism, for which they are said to be a specific, as well as for 100 other things. She had one daughter staying with her, who, it seems, made better use of her time than I did, for she succeeded in making a conquest without being aware of it, of a very rich man, who all at once fell desperately in love with her, but being anxious to break the spell if he could, set off to a country house of his about 40 miles distant, where he remained for 10 days. But I suppose the old saying is a true one: the more a poor fellow struggles to get out of such a scrape, the deeper he is seen to get in. Such was the case with my friend in question, for at the end of the 10 days he returned worse than ever, and finding himself unable to resist the attractions of his idol, and it is Lady Matheson we're talking about here, disclosed his feelings to his sister and made her his confidant. In due time, Mrs. Percival was informed of the state of things, and had consent been obtained for the gentleman to pay his addresses, the usual process took place, which ended as these things usually do, in the young lady pronouncing the monosyllable which was to make the lover happy. The gentleman whom my niece has chosen for her husband is Mr. Matheson of Achani in the county of Sutherland, of which he is a deputy lieutenant, and is also a member of the collective wisdom of the nation. He is an MP, I think he means. His worldly goods he has given in at upwards of £500,000 sterling, and as soon as the settlements can be settled, which are now in progress, the marriage will take place. But I do not think it will be before the first week of the month. They will pass the honeymoon at a friend's house in Perthshire, and then proceed to the continent for the winter. His parliamentary duties will, of course, bring him back to London early in the spring, when they go to his residence, which is one of those houses in Carlton Gardens. I remain here, of course, until the marriage ceremony takes place, as I shall have to act papa and give away my niece. But soon after the ceremony is over, I think I shall return to London, as I find this place would be too cold for me to stay much longer. And true enough, he did find it too cold. He writes after the wedding that after waiting in Edinburgh to perform the important part of the ceremony, which devolved upon me, that of giving her away, and then stopping for another week or 10 days, to assist at a round of visits which were said to be necessary, I determined to escape any further inflictions of that sort by shipping myself off on the Princess Royal on the Saturday last, for this metropolis, which, though dull enough at this season of the year, is still lively in comparison with Edinburgh, which is certainly the stupidest city I know. The worldly prospects of my niece, who is just married, are certainly far beyond anything that she could by any possibility have expected, and from what I have seen of Mr. Matheson and heard of his character, I have no doubt that her domestic happiness will be equal to her worldly riches. He has settled £160,000 on her, should she survive him, without restrictions of any sort, so that if he were to die tomorrow, that sum would be at her own entire disposal, to give it to whom she pleased. Besides this, there are minor advantages she would have, such as house, plate, carriages, horses, etc. In fact, she is one of the most lucky girls under the sun. The settlements were his own spontaneous wishes and directions to his solicitors. We knew nothing about them till he submitted them to Mrs. Percival, and asked her if she was satisfied with them, and if she considered them sufficient for her daughter, which she obviously would have done. There's a couple of letters where he asks the Mathesons to come up. He asks Newborough to come up to Lewis, and Newborough puts it off for a while. He's not too keen to come up to Lewis. There's one letter from Sir James to my dear Lord Newborough. Accept 1,000 thanks from Mrs. Matheson and myself for your kind remembrance in the shape of some beautiful birds, which arrived in high order yesterday. They are the more acceptable, as this description of game has been rather scarce in the Highlands of Scotland this season. And he asks him again in 1846, my dear Lord Newborough, I hope you've not forgotten your kind promise to come and take some shooting with us in the Lewis this season. We shall be most happy to see you. But except a little sport, can promise you nothing beyond a hearty welcome. All is in the rough, and our accommodation so limited that some of our friends will have to sleep in a temporary wooden house which we're having made at Glasgow. Which,
yes, essentially it was a kit house, but I understand it by the time. But by the time they came, he had decided not to. I think it had been delivered, but it wasn't built in the end.
Morecambe, do you want to try that one? Give the audience a break from my wuthering.
Yes, this is a letter from Spencer Percival to Lord Newborough.
This is Lady Matheson's brother.
Yes, not the Prime Minister. Yes. Dear Lord Newborough, if I should be so fortunate as to have this letter arrive into your hands at a convenient time, it would be rendering me a kind service to arm yourself at once with your pen and dash me off a few lines in reply. It seems that on several occasions I have remarked with much enthusiasm on sundry excellent things in your house. Among others, when finding Mr. and Mrs. Matheson complain of the atrocious manner in which their servants are breaking so much glass and china as they could, not reasonably, but unreasonably, smash as well as any other trifles that could be handily twisted or tossed on the floor. So I have often said, why do you not follow Lord Newborough's plan of making these vagabond chaps pay? However, they were not quite prepared for the measure and always foresaw certain practical difficulties. With things coming to a crisis of breakage, they expressed their intention of introducing this system of who breaks pays. If a barrel of gunpowder had suddenly gone off downstairs, there could not have been a greater commotion than was caused by the mere commencement of this project in those regions of cracks and smashes. My sister therefore begged me to see if you would not be so obliging as to give me some few details by which you control the disorderly spirits of a household, and if you would not add to any little hints that you have acquired in many years' experience, and by which your house is so marked by rule and order. Just half a dozen little odds and ends that might be useful. Pray now, Lord Newborough, don't be angry with the freedom with which I have used on this subject, and which only your great kindness to me could have led me to. Be so good as to offer Mr. and Mrs. Matheson's best compliments to Lady Newborough, and pray, including mine, and many loves to, and then there's a couple of words missing here, dear little children, I am very truly yours, Spencer Percival.
There you go, Mark. That's the next one he wrote. Just the red bit.
Yes. Dear Lord Leib, I'm cracking up as well. Dear Lord Newborough, you have certainly a very happy knack, both of giving information and adding amusement to it. Yours of yesterday was a capital production and gave us all the utmost merriment whilst reading. In fact, it was much more fits or laughter than anything else that we have had at your droll descriptions, and Mr. and Mrs. M felt beside an undercurrent of satisfaction that at any rate others have had the same bothers as themselves, though they were certainly horrified at those ruins of Pompeii, as they had begun to think they might one day make a like discovery. They desire, however, many sincere thanks for the obliging manner in which you have furnished them with such full particulars, and they propose taking the earliest steps for putting the screw on in the way you have described. They hope also that you may see it in full play this year when you come north, for they wish you to be reminded of the promise you made them last year. And Mr. Matheson has just added that the wooden house, which he imagines frightened you from coming, has now given place to an enlarged wing, offering solid accommodation. Next September he hopes to see you arrive and have a good, well, it looks like a shy, but possibly a shot at the birds. Of the feathered variety.
Well, you never know. Yeah. So the friendship, obviously, between the Mathesons and the Newboroughs was, building up a bit, because there's a letter from James Matheson to Lord Newborough, and at this point there's still Mr. and Mrs. Matheson. They're not Sir James and Lady Matheson. He hasn't been elevated to the baronetcy yet. And he's obviously at Bangor railway station, and he's writing a note to my dear Lord Newborough. We arrived an hour and 3/4, as the postboy said, nearly an hour earlier than was required. The car arrived soon afterwards, and I hope will return to you in safety. All is arranged satisfactorily about our baggage going tomorrow. And now, my dear Lord, how can I express one tithe of what we feel for all the unbounded kindness and hospitality we have received from Lady Newborough and yourself? I only hope Lady Newborough will not be the worse for all her kind exertions. It has been the fashion to speak of Highland hospitality, but henceforth we shall think it completely in the shade by what we have so agreeably experienced at Glenliffon. So the friendship was obviously building up, and in 1848 Lord Newborough built a yacht called the Vesta, and it was an iron screw steamer. It was built at Todd and MacGregor's, which I believe is where the
The Mary Jane was built.
Mary
Yes,
Jane was built
Yeah.
in Glasgow's Meadowside, and its maiden voyage, I think, was in that summer of July 1848. And they decided that they would go up to Lewis for a shooting trip, Lord Newborough and some of his friends. Now, his wife, Lady Frances Newborough, there's a couple of letters from her because she's obviously worried at the prospect of them going off in this new boat all the way up from Wales to that very remote place, Lewis. And on September the 4th, she writes from Glenliffon saying, "My dearest N, I scribble you a line by this post, fearing sending it tomorrow may well be too late for the Mary Jane on Thursday." She talks about the children being well and what lovely weather they've had. And it's a great blessing for the country, and I trust you will arrive safe this evening at Stornoway after a long and pleasant voyage and no accident. And she says that she's been very silly about him, but she feels ashamed of her affection. She could hardly either hear mentioned your name, and so often talked about you, wondering where you were, dear, without shedding tears all Saturday and Sunday. I think you must have given us all frequent affectionate thoughts. It seems very long before we can hear from you. So she seems to think it's going to be a very dangerous voyage for him all the way up to Lewis. And
can I just butt in, Cathy?
Go on.
Explain to people the Mary Jane was the mail packet that was introduced by Sir James Matheson to plough them, in case you don't know what the Mary Jane was.
Yes, yeah. And then a week later, she's heard from them. She says, "We were very glad to receive your note and thankful to hear you reached so far safe and well. It's indeed a very long time to wait almost a fortnight without the possibility of hearing anything about you, which it would have been if you had not sent that line." And then she's talking about the children and how they are, and there was a bazaar on that time that they went to for I think raising funds for a school nearby. And I just put this in because I think it's just so typical of women. We're not to know how much the bazaar took in until the end of the week. I'd only intended to spend £1, and I spent and it looks like £17. Could be wrong. Besides, gave £5 and some little the chicks spent, and so on and so on. I thought for a day or two that I had spent a great deal too much and very little worth having for it. But when I considered that had I gone to the ball, my dress and headdress would have cost almost that money, I began to think better of it, and considered the money for so good a purpose did a great deal more good. I bought some clothes for the poor with some of your £5, and at Mrs. somebody's stall I bought a few things to please myself. I shall, however, be obliged to scrimp now for some time, unless you kindly help me. And then at the end she sort of slips in, "I've been thinking a great deal about you. It seems very long for you to be away. What kind of sport have you had? I wish we could receive and send letters oftener. With a north wind you will not be so long in returning as going. Every vessel almost that passes here I wish was the Vesta. She looked very pretty as she went by Bellan when you left. Mr. Manley says he thinks her too heavy-masted, which makes her not go faster but plunges her into the water. Also he thinks her bow too heavy, I think he said, in the water. But he says all this. If so, you will soon find out. I hope you all have an opportunity of judging these things and of her sailing prowess this trip." And then she said, "I was in hope you could have got to Stornoway on Monday night. I hope poor Captain Percival was not the worse for the voyage and seasickness. I think that must be Spencer Percival, the brother. Give my love to Mrs. Percival and Mrs. Matheson." In one of the next ones, she talks about if you touch at any port where there are shops in Scotland, I wish you would kindly buy pretty Scotch plaid to be made all woolen to make a frock for dear Isabella. Oh, and then again she says, "Mrs. Manley wishes to ask you to bring a few roots of tussock grass from the Lewis. She says it will look so well planted here." Now that's Ken's discovery that Sir James took tussock grass from the Falkland Islands,
Yes,
was
yeah.
it?
There were actually experiments carried out in the grounds of Lewis Castle and across at Coll and Harnish
Right. So she's asking for some of that to be sent down to Wales. And then there's a wee one from one of the girls has written, the little girl has written to her father, "My dearest Papa, I hope you are very well. We went to Carnarvon Church yesterday. The tide was in our favour going and coming, so they were obviously going by boat. Uncle Tom's coming tomorrow, and we expect Grandpapa either the middle or the end of the week. We want to know very much what the cook did to have been put in jail. Wynn's going to try to fish today. We don't know yet how much money they got at the bazaar. When are you coming home? We hope you will come soon. Your very affectionate daughter, Frances M. Wynne." Now, we have, I don't know if you can read that, a press report of what the sportsmen took on that journey. It's from the Aberdeen Journal, 25th October 1848. "Several sportsmen, friends of Sir James Matheson, SMP, returned last week from Lewis, where they enjoyed excellent sport, having bagged 450 brace of grouse, about 50 couple of snipe, 20 brace of golden plovers, and 7 red deer." That would be the brother-in-law G.W. Dennis-esque, Lord Newborough, W.B. Hankey-esque, and Mr. Fitzgerald were of the party. We understand that Mr. and Mrs. Matheson intend spending the ensuing winter at Lewis. There's just a couple others. Her brother writes the following year, 1849, he says, "We are happy here, happy as princes, or rather as ducks, for it storms and rains all day and every day. It's January." He's writing from Stornoway. He says, "There's a terrible row going on here. A Captain Baker, RN, having called old Mrs. Watts an owl, a gossip, a melancholy instance of a woman. She calls him a trash of a man, a brute, and other cheerful things. And civil war is waging fierce to our endless delight. Of course, everybody takes care to keep feeding the flames. Bets are in favour of her talking them out." I think maybe we'll go on to the album now.
Mhm.
There were other ones about how much shooting and fishing they were doing at Morska, but I think that will bore you too much, so we'll move on. This is Stornoway House, 13 Cleveland Row, which the Mathesons bought just after their marriage, which has been a very well-known place over the years.
Mhm.
Beaverbrook, yeah?
Beaverbrook had it. It's actually next door to Clarence House. It was bombed during the war, I believe.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's.
So in the 1851, this is the 1851 census. You can't read that very well, but there is Sir James Matheson, Baronet MP, landed proprietor, Mary Jane Matheson, his wife, Christina Emma Perceval, his wife's sister, and 14 servants. There's a butler, a housekeeper, a lady's maid, a groom of chambers, an under butler, 2 footmen, 2 housemaids, a still-room maid, a kitchen maid, a scullery maid, a messenger boy, and a lady's maid in the house. Now, these photographs came to us from the...
This is from Lady Matheson's photo album, which is at Museum Nynaylan, and we have to thank them for supplying us with digitised copies of it. Now, Lady Matheson was one of the first ever female photographers. A lot of people don't know that. She first started taking pictures in the mid-1850s, and most of the pictures in this album, it's around about 90 of them, were taken between about 1856 and about 1866 or so on. She was a member of the Photographic Society of Scotland, which included many of the leading pioneers in photography in Scotland, including George Washington Wilson, David Octavius Hill, and Sir David Brewster. She also knew the inventor of photography, William Henry Fox Talbot, because he was living in Edinburgh in the 1850s. Her photographs in this album, we know some of the pictures were exhibited in 1856 and 1858, so they're quite early, in fact very early. So most of them are in very poor condition. They're very faint brown. Sometimes they didn't come out very well because she was using what was known as a collotype process. It would take about 15 minutes for the picture to be developed, but you which is why a lot of the pictures are taken just outside the castle. You could take, as you see, this picture is taken at the Creed. You could have like a tent thing which was over the camera. So obviously she probably had a few lackeys helping her with the pictures. You can't see there's actually I think 2 gentlemen on the bridge. There's one on the island, and there's a few guys in the boat. That's actually one of the better quality images in the album.
Okay.
Carry on. We think this is possibly a person she describes as Aunt Helen. We don't know if she is actually an aunt or not, but you might notice the chair. The first image in the album is actually of this lady, but it's not this one. But I thought it was quite a striking image.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one has been published before in a book. It's called Visitors to the Castle. This one was exhibited in the 1850s, so we know it's pretty early.
Does she make the faces?
We don't really know. It's not so clear who they are. I mean, we have identified some of the people in the photographs, but we haven't been able to identify these people so far. Okay, this one is actually Lady Matheson's sister, her eldest sister, Catherine Eliza, with her son, Francis Dennis, later Sir Francis Dennis Burton. He was Lady Matheson's favourite nephew, and he was a frequent visitor to the island for the hunting, shooting, fishing. And he actually inherited a lot of her fortune when she died in 1896. He would be about 7 or 8 years old. He was born in 1849, so we know roughly when this photograph dates from.
He's got the obligatory Highland
Oh, yes.
dress.
Yeah. And this is them again. This is quite a nice study. Emma Tartan in a bonnet outside the castle.
No idea who this
We
is.
don't know. It might be one of her brothers, possibly Charles. Kind of resembles him. This is possibly her younger sister, Christina, and her husband, Edward Ashford Sanford, who was from Somerset.
Oh, this is the mentioning of the Sanford marriage. Rejoicings at Stornoway on Tuesday the 19th of Ultimote. A salute was fired from the large guns at Lewis Castle in honour of the marriage of Alexander Matheson, Esquire of Ardross, with the Honourable Miss Stapleton. Now they were cousins, nephews of Sir James.
Alexander Matheson was a nephew, yes.
And on the following day, great rejoicings took place on account of the marriage of Miss Percival, who was the Christina, with the Reverend Mr. Sanford. In the course of the day, the guns kept firing and bonfires blazed on the adjacent hills in the evening. All the labourers employed at the grounds about the Lewis Castle, numbering upwards of 500, were treated to liberal supplies of Mountain Dew, ale, cakes, etc., and they marched through the policies with flags flying and preceded by a piper. Hearty bumpers were quaffed to the health and happiness of the young couple, Sir James and Lady Matheson, etc. Miss Percival was a great favourite here among all classes, and the prevailing wish is that everything good may attend her. The rejoicings terminated at a late hour, and the company retired to their homes in the most orderly manner. That's Catherine Dennis again with one of her daughters, we think.
Yes, it'll be either Adelaide or Charlotte. Again.
Same again.
Yeah. And this is interesting. This is taken in the conservatory before the flowers were put in. So we know this is about 1866, this picture. Colonel Houston was also, as I said, he was a soldier. He was also fought in the Crimean War. He was at the Battle of Balaclava. This is Anne Caroline Percival in the middle. This is Lady Matheson's sister, and their daughter Helen on the right. We don't know who the little girl was. It wasn't their daughter, we know that.
Oh yeah, this is possibly her brother, Perceval.
Spencer, yeah.
Spencer. And this is, I think, I found it in an album or a collection of poems, of thoughts from poems, ancient and modern. And it says, "Dost thou not know the fate of soldiers? They're but ambition's tools when they're worn, hacked-hewed with constant service, thrown aside to rust in peace and rot in hospitals." It's in the album, it's above the photograph. And it's apparently from a 17th century play by Thomas Southern. And I think there is part of a phrase missing, but I can't find it. There's a phrase between ambitious tools, something like "to cut away for her unlawful ends," it says. "They're but ambition's tools to cut away for her unlawful ends." when they're worn, hacked, hewn with constant service, thrown aside. So we think that's her brother, but again, it's just a guess.
You don't recognise the uniform, do you? Malcolm? No. Ah, right. Well, this is Sir James's brother, Colonel, later General Thomas Matheson. He was 2 years younger than Sir James, and as you can see, he bears a very strong resemblance to him. He served in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. He retired from active duty in 1843. He was promoted to Major General, though, in 1859. And as we can see, he's sometimes been confused with his brother, as we'll see later.
I don't know how good that those come up on the screen. The Creed boating excursion.
Yes, there's several. You can see there's a woman standing on the rock above the
Yeah,
boat.
there is a woman. You can just see her up above the boat there.
There's several girls on the boat. Now, everybody's perhaps seen this photograph before and assumed it was Sir James with his nephew, Donald Matheson, who inherited the estate eventually. But in fact, it's not. This is actually Thomas Matheson again. If you look at photographs of Sir James, not just in this album in general, he actually had longer sideburns, and he was grey-haired by this time. Even by the 1850s, he was grey-haired and quite frail. This picture we think was taken at Achani, Sir James's Sutherland estate. So it's not Sir James. We believe it's his brother Thomas, who was also, when Sir James purchased his estate at Ashburton in Devon, succeeded him as MP in 1847. So he briefly was an MP too. He died at Achani in 1873. Now, this one is an interesting one. When you actually see it in the album, you cannot see the top half at all. And I've tried my best without success. You can see the little boy on the rock. But what you're looking at is Goat Island in the centre, and you can see just the pier. Unfortunately, the buildings have faded very badly, but this is a very early view of Stornoway from the mid-1850s.
I think that might be the earliest photographic
Could
view
be.
of the harbour. Any idea, I'm looking at Morris, any idea where it's taken from?
No, initially I thought Sober Island, but I think it's too high.
It's too high. But no idea.
We could see it's orange. I think it is. I don't know. It's just, somebody with a bit more skill could touch it up a bit.
It could be sort of side of Gallas Hill.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Before the trees.
Yeah, the trees wouldn't have grown.
But that must be one of the oldest.
See the
actually.
size of the schooner that's in the sea. It's sort of rented. It must be quite high up.
What, the one off Goat Island?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
the boat.
No,
the boat
Yeah,
Island.
just over the
That's how I
side
would
of
say
the-
it looks like a schooner.
Right, okay.
You can't really mention what castle about the schooner.
That's just
It
what I
could
was
be.
wondering, Michael. I was wondering if you see it's, looks the
Okay,
shape,
then
doesn't it?
well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, the little tower.
yeah.
I wonder if can you imagine that in our crinolines, standing with all that equipment, taking
Yes.
that?
There's
I
a
think
few.
the line of Good Island is in line with the exit to the harbour.
Yeah.
So if
So
you
yeah.
were to draw a transit line from that through the end of the island and carry it on, it would tell you where you are. I'll do that in Google Earth when I get home.
Brilliant. See, I knew if I asked a sailor that, I'd get a good answer. There
Yeah.
you go. Unidentified child, no idea who the wee girl is.
It could be one of the nieces, but this is actually taken at the sunken garden terrace steps. You notice that she's got a boat, and we think this was taken before the conservatories were built because there was an ornamental pond where the conservatories later were. So this was early. It's not very clear, but this is the terrace, the big terrace steps. Okay. This is a this is actually based on an early photograph. It's actually the first group photograph that's in the album, but it didn't come out very well. It's difficult to identify people. You can see Sir James here sitting down with his hat, his sister-in-law Catherine Eliza with Francis, and of course Thomas Mackay, the piper. I'm sure one of Tony's ancestors, I believe.
And there's someone sort of beside the piper. It looks as if he's one of the staff.
Yes, and with the cloth cap to his left, yeah. This is a cracker. And this is a maid in the conservatory.
Don't know who she is
No.
either. No.
It's one of the few pictures, not of the family, but of a member of staff.
She looks like she's from Marvick.
I don't know what you mean by that.
She's not from Achmore anyway.
Too posh.
Too posh. Don't know who this is. Miss
No,
Marie Percival.
she's described in this. Not many of the photographs are captioned, but this one is. It's described as Miss Marie Percival. Now we know that Lady Matheson's brother Michael Henry Percival was married to a Maria Percival, but we don't know if this is her. And we now know, thanks to Malcolm's research, that the conservatories were actually built in 1866. Because he found an
That was today.
That's just today. There's a report on the building of them in 1866.
In the John O'Groats Journal of all places, but these things just crop up
Yeah.
from time to time.
Okay.
Mhm.
And it proved that the Conservatives came from Birmingham. and
Yes,
the Birmingham
the
workers
archi-
worked on
it was an architect called James Cranston from Birmingham who designed them. Yeah.
Well, this is from the Inverness Courier in 1862, just talking about some of the people who were visiting. Sir James and Lady Matheson had entertained a numerous and distinguished circle of friends at Lewis Castle, including Sir George, Lady and the Mrs. Dennis, Sir Henry Holland, Mr. Matheson of Ardross MP and Mrs. Matheson, Mr. Robertson of Ladykirk MP and Mrs. Robertson, Mr. and Mrs. Ingleby, Colonel Perceval, presume that's her brother,
Yes.
Colonel Kinloch, Colonel and Mrs. Kennedy, Reverend Mr. Sanford, Miss Percival, now maybe that's the Marie Percival that we saw earlier on, and Miss Houston, which is
One of the nieces.
one of the nieces.
Mhm.
That's Mrs. Percival, the Caliph herself, and the group. We think this is taken in France, in
Isabella's.
Isabella's.
We think that's Donald Matheson on the right. Sons.
We could be wrong.
It could be, but if it is him, it does resemble then that would be his wife, Jane Ellen Petley. Colonel Matheson at the back, not Sir James. And this is Helen Houston again, and her sister Caroline at the bottom.
Yeah.
Mrs. Percival sitting down. I'm not sure who the girl is. This is
Mrs. Percival again with
with
I think
flowers.
it's
We thought
obviously
that was appropriate
one
since
of
she.
her, one
yeah.
of her staged ones probably
Yeah.
for exhibition.
Not very good. Now this is a picnic at the Creed.
I don't know how
Now,
well you can
How
see this.
Lady
one.
Matheson got on top of the cave with her camera, I don't know, but she did. This is probably taken just after the paths were laid down. You can see at the head of the table Sir James, possibly the piper in the background. I think one of the Dennis nieces, but it's very hard to make out the
It's
others.
very hard to make out, but the girl on the left on the end of the table, I think she's frozen, fed up and wants to go home by the way she's sitting.
I've actually found another one that's not in the album, but it's taken from the front of the
Yeah, I didn't
yeah,
copy
so the
that
Stornoway
one.
Trust have
Yeah.
that one, I think.
This one's damaged as well. Now,
It's interesting because if you look in the background, you see that there's work going on
yeah,
at the Port Cochere, as they call it. Sir James sitting with his cadie cap on.
the faces are faded on all of these, which
They're
is a
not
great
very,
shame.
unfortunately.
It's a shame.
It's Sir James sitting down, which is how he was quite frail by that time. So
Pony and Trap, we don't know
Yeah.
who's.
no, it's probably
Right, Malcolm, Healy Hutchinson.
go on. Hurry up. What's interesting about Healy Hutchinson is that it appears that one of Lady Matheson's uncles, Colonel Perceval, actually served with his father, possibly, in the army.
I just we don't really know much about Healy Hutchison, but Healy Hutchison is the family name of the heirs of Dunamore in Ireland, and the first of them was in 1800, and Healy Hutchison was born at St Marylebone on the 28th of September 1799, so he could be a brother of theirs. Now, he must have been wealthy like they were wealthy, because he lived when he was up here at Soval Lodge for something like 20 years, and he just was a professional sportsman, shooting, doing fishing, doing what he liked. And it was obviously he was part-time pastor of St Peter's Church from 1856 to 1869, and he wrote Reminiscences of the Lewes, or 20 Years Wild Sport in the Hebrides, and it came under the nom de plume of 61, but it was him, and there was 8 volumes, and it was published in 1865 in London. I haven't been able to find out when he died.
I don't know, but
Okay.
if you do have a copy of that, I saw it going on one of the websites for £600 people. So if you've got a copy of 61, you're sitting on a fortune.
David S.D. Jones has written quite a bit about him back in the day, if you followed the saga of all these
Well,
These things are
well, I
so
can
much
tell you,
special.
Malcolm, that he was an illegitimate son of the Earl of Donoughmore,
Oh, well,
And,
here we are.
but that the Earl did his duty,
So they must have sent him up here to
Yes.
keep him out of the way.
but that he paid for his education and made sure that he was well looked after. So yeah, this one was exhibited actually. This is called the Angler at Rest, although it says the vicar, and of course Lady Matheson was an Anglican, so she did attend St Peter's. But this one was exhibited. We know that in either 1856 or 1858. The sundial in the sunken garden. Now, for a long time we didn't know who this was, but we now know that it's Lady Matheson's brother-in-law, Sir George Dennis, probably about the year. And this is one of the few pictures of Sir James actually standing. It's not a very good one, but it is him. This is in the conservatory, Sir James sitting down with, we think the Dennis nieces are Adelaide or Charlotte. This is taken in the upper sunken garden. We think Sir George Dennis is the second right, his wife, and again Colonel General Matheson at the back. This is a cracker. This is the Porter's Lodge under construction. This is, we think, about 1857. So you can see, it's not very clear. You can't really see through the archway very well, but you can see that.
Is that house still there? One and
I
Behead?
don't think so.
No, gone?
No, I don't think so.
It's not one of the ones that are still there. Right?
Stornoway volunteers. Now this is Malcolm's.
Malcolm's the expert in this one.
Well, the caption says Stornoway Volunteers 1860s, and that's quite accurate because the Stornoway Volunteers were formed in 1860, and for those of you who are long in the tooth like me, can remember in 1960 the centenary of the Ross Battery, which became, they were the founding body. And I've actually found something in the Inverness Courier for Stornoway, 17th October 1860, which I'll read out. The Hebridean metropolis, as our little town is not infrequently called, presented quite a military appearance on Saturday last, when the Artillery Volunteer Corps, which holds the honourable position of being the first Ross-shire, turned out to parade in uniform. The Corps, upwards of 60 strong, assembled to the sound of the bugle at 2 p.m. at the Mason Hall, the use of which commodious building the Masonic body handsomely placed at the disposal of the Corps for drilling, and in the unavoidable absence of Captain Munro, that's the famous Donald Munro, and Lieutenant McKeever, who I don't know of, the command devolved to Lieutenant Morrison. After the Corps fell in, they marched by Scotland Street, Kenneth Street, as they would do, Cromwell Street, the South Beach, Francis Street, and the New Drive, which would be Matheson Road, to Mill Glen. At Bayhead they met Captain Munro, who was returned to town, and as he drove by, they presented arms. After returning from Mill Glen, they proceeded to Lewes Castle and drew up in line on the terrace in front, where they were inspected by Sir James and Lady Matheson, General Matheson, obviously his
Thomas
brother,
Matheson, yeah.
and the other guests staying at the castle. They put through several evolutions which were creditably executed, and Sir James heartily congratulated them on the progress they had made. Lieutenant Morrison acknowledged the compliment and explained that the good appearance made by them was the result of the untiring zeal, patience and fidelity of Sergeant Ward, their drill instructor, whose conduct they could not too highly commend. 3 cheers were given for Sir James, her ladyship and the gallant general, and thereafter the Corps marched off in fours, led by Mackay, the castle piper, who played some excellent marches. The Corps returned to town at 6 p.m, highly delighted with the day's proceedings. The uniform is a very becoming one. Blue tunic and trousers with red facings, a blue cap with a red band and button, and brown belts. The uniform of the officers is similar, excepting that silver lace is substituted for red facings. The steamer on the 13th brought 2 32-pounder guns and carriages for the use of the Corps, which they speedily placed in position under the instruction of Sergeant Ward. So there's also in 1866 they paraded again, so it might have been an annual occurrence. And Donald Munro actually in 1866 presented the volunteers with a cup for shooting, which they fired off quarterly. And the first winner was a William Mackenzie, Gunner William Mackenzie, who I believe was Willie Oak, the baker, on Behead. So
And this is another of Lady Matheson's photographs, just to
Yeah.
clarify.
See the officer with the sword skull? That wouldn't be Donald Munro, would it? No,
It doesn't look like him.
No.
So
So
it
it's
could
one of
very
the
well be
other-
that Lieutenant Morrison that was
maybe Lieutenant Boyce.
need to look into it a little bit more.
Now, this one I just put in at the end, close to the end, Mrs. Percival's Cadetes, which was a separate thing. It was obviously I don't know if you know anything about them, Morgan.
I haven't come
No.
across them until you
It's
told me.
from the 1868 John O'Grove Journal, and it says, on Tuesday, the first current, the corps of the cadets established and clothed by Mrs. Percival was inspected by her at Lewes Castle. A number of the boys are at present enjoying their holidays out of town, so that the muster was not so strong as was expected on this occasion. Those present, however, went through their drill with remarkable precision and steadiness. They then marched past to the music of their excellent drum and flute band, and formed in line facing the castle entrance, where they were highly complimented for their tidy, smart and soldier-like appearance. Mrs. Percival also complimented their drill instructor, Sergeant Craig R.A., and said she could not sufficiently express to him her thanks for the care and attention he seemingly bestowed on the boys. As a mark of appreciation, she presented Sergeant Craig with a richly plated silver teapot, cream jug and sugar bowl. The sergeant thanked Mrs. Percival for this I knew I wasn't going to be able to say that, munificent gift, of which he said he would ever be proud. Corporal Macfarlane of the cadets was called forward and presented with an excellent walnut writing desk fitted with all requisites as a mark of satisfaction. The boys were regaled with cake, fruit and milk, after which they gave 3 cheers and were marched back to town and dismissed. That's another of Mrs. Percival's.
It was also in that year that the plaque that she put up on the Cuddy Point
Of course, yeah.
was put up, and that was in commemoration of Sir James and Lady Matheson's silver wedding
I
anniversary.
think it said to the best ever son-in-law or something like
To
that.
the best of sons-in-laws.
Best of sons.
Oh,
Right.
Got the,
Well, these were the years, I suppose the peak years for the Mathesons, the 50s and 60s, when everything was just beginning to take shape, the grounds, the castle. This is from the Surrey Comet of June 1863, and it says, "It is said that the blaze of diamonds at the late City of London ball has never been paralleled in modern times. Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales' dress was dazzlingly brilliant, but she was far outshone by some of the city dames. Lady Matheson, wife of Sir James, formerly of the firm of Jardine, Matheson and Co., the great China merchants, carried about with her a dozen respectable fortunes. The formidable invitation tickets cost upwards of..." Now, is that 2,000? That can't be £2,000. It's got to be 2,000 shillings, surely. It can't possibly be £2,000. So that was the circles she was moving in. We came across another entry. It's in a letter by Disraeli to Sarah Disraeli, and is talking about having gone to dinner with the Danish ambassador in London, and the Mathesons were there as well. So, they're mixing in high.
Yes, there were
high
also
places.
horticultural shows where
They were at,
Queen
yeah,
Victoria was there with them.
that's right, yeah, and lots of at homes. So that's her, Lady Matheson, in 1861.
there's also one of Sir James that was done at this
At that time,
yeah, from this French photographer.
Now,
So
in the 1870s, things started to change because she lost her mother in 1877.
1776.
And, right, and Spencer, her brother,
Mhm.
and then her father, her husband,
1878.
1879. So by the time the last slide was taken, it's the 8th of September 1881, and I think it sums up. I still haven't found out much about Lady Matheson herself. And it comes from a newspaper article about the spa town of Buxton, and this man is talking about all the different people who are there for the waters. And it says, "The lady yonder more a presence than a person, this Lady Matheson of Stornoway Castle, who has come from the glory and glamour of the Western Highlands to find a new scenic charm in North Derbyshire." And I think that's all I know. She's more a presence than a person. You don't really know. You don't have letters from her or or anything to say what kind of person she was, other than the official ones that she's written to, and the way she comes across when the Crofter raids are on, and all the ways. And that was the start of that decade of the Crofter unrest. And she died in 1896 down in London, I think.
Yeah, she died in London.
And she's buried in Sutherlandshire.
She's buried in Lairg alongside
Yeah.
Sir James, yes.
And there was a boatload of Stornoway gentlemen went across to the funeral in March in 1896. And I think we're finished. You'll be glad to know.
Well, I'd like to thank Poirot and Marple for the
Which one's
Swedish detective.